Sophie, of course, seeing the news coming in this evening, talking about, the fact that former Finance Minister Tito Mboweni has passed away. Perhaps maybe just give us some of, your interactions with the former minister.
In Parliament as a parliamentary correspondent. At that time, he was the person responsible for the central bank, the governor of the central bank, the first black governor of the central bank. But I think for me, when he was appointed by the Rwandan president, Paul Kagame, to be part of the team that was given a task to look at the reforms of the African Union. You know that it was launched in 2000, and the first leader of that organization, after it was transformed from Organization of African Unity to AU, it was South Africa. And when there was a decision a few years ago by the AU that they must look at perhaps positioning the continental body in line with the current challenges. He was part of that team, and he was appointed because they were looking at the input that he can bring as someone with vast experience of economy, but also someone who has led the Central Bank of South Africa and now being respected worldwide. And therefore, he worked very close with President Paul Kagame. He would travel to Rwanda. Many people will recall that he would often post on social media about his experiences in Rwanda. All the time when he went to Rwanda, it was because they were working on the reforms of the African Union. And secondly, he was in exile in Lesotho, and therefore he would often visit Lesotho. Not so long ago, he was in Lesotho. You know that he studied at Roma University in Lesotho, now called Lesotho University, and with people like Dr. Phumzile Mlambo-Ngcuka, the former premier of Limpopo, Dr. Advocate Wako Ramatlhodi. So he was one of those people who went to exile and stayed in Lesotho. And even in recent times, he visited Lesotho, where he was honored by the same university. SABC was there. We did a story where he spoke about his appreciation of how Basotho treated them, but also supported them, and which led to him even being able to acquire the education that he later used as a first black central bank governor or the Reserve Bank governor. And at that time, his deputy was Mr. Timothy Tahani. Mr. Timothy Tahani came from Lesotho, and he was the deputy of the then governor, Tito Mboweni. And therefore, he used to also attend all these multilateral gatherings, particularly of financial institution as part of the United Nations, your World Bank meetings, your IMF meetings, including the World Economic Forum. So he was well known, I must say, because of his involvement with IMF and the World Bank, but on the continent also very passionate about the development and the transformation of the continent, and it came as no surprise to some of us when he was part of this important team that looked at the transformation or changes within the African Union agencies, and they were led by the president of Rwanda, Paul Kagame.
And Sophie, I mean, you are highlighting, the role he did play on the African continent. But zooming into Rwanda, one would also ask, why did Rwanda remain so close to his heart, and something that he often even got into trouble for by many South Africans on social media?
You know that Rwanda is always looking at people and countries where they can learn. You'd recall when I spoke to the president of Rwanda, Paul Kagame, earlier this year, just before the commemoration, he spoke about how South Africa played a prominent role in giving capacity in terms of people who occupied high positions now in Rwanda, and some of them studying in South Africa. And therefore, Rwanda always looked to South Africa in terms of capacity building. And that is why they created a relationship with Tito Mboweni as a former governor, particularly on issues of development. And that is why he would often visit Rwanda and share his experience in terms of how this country that was literally a failed state, a dead country after the genocide, how it has emerged. And that is why, and there was a time where he wanted to stop communicating on then Twitter, now X. And it was on that platform the president of Rwanda, Paul Kagame, said, no, you must continue to be on this platform because people would want to hear from you as someone on the continent with vast experience on issues related to the economy, and you've led a reserve bank in South Africa that became so successful, and your legacy cannot be forgotten. So it was very, very, very personal, but also it developed into a personal relationship. It had to do with his work and his skills, and the continent was tapping into his skills, even though he was sitting there at Makuba Group.
And Sophie, you know, this death comes at a time where South Africans have just bid farewell to another former finance minister, Pravin Gordhan, and now we are seeing the death of, another former finance minister, Tito Mboweni. What does this all mean for South Africa, particularly at a time where we're losing two former finance ministers in 1 year?
Well, indeed, this is what happens. People do pass on. The question is their contribution to the nation and the development of the country, the continent, and the world. And this is what we will always talk about when it happens. And therefore, that is why today we are also talking about Tito Mboweni. I mean, he was a colleague to Pravin when Pravin was head of SARS, and therefore they were running these important institutions. They were part of the leadership of South Africans who were driving the economic direction of this country and working with Treasury, and therefore later he did occupy that position of being a finance minister. But yeah, Tito Mboweni, the first black governor of the Central Bank of South Africa, we call it Reserve Bank, and therefore that history will remain, and he was then deputized by Timothy Tahani from Lesotho, and I think they identified him knowing the people from Lesotho who would have expertise in helping South Africa during the transition as the power shift from those who occupied power before 1994 to the black majority, and people like Tito Mboweni led the way. You would recall that he was also the Minister of Labour during Nelson Mandela's cabinet. He was there. He was the first Minister of Labour after 1994. Therefore, he had a very vast experience, and when he was appointed the Labour Minister, he was very, very, very young. These are some of the people who were very young in Nelson Mandela's cabinet. And of course, later in Thabo Mbeki's era, you had him as being the central bank governor. And later he became the finance minister, I think. And then, of course, on the continent, as I pointed out, leading with the pack in terms of the transformation of some of the agencies of the African Union so that it can be able to discharge its responsibility during these different times, these difficult times, where the focus
Sophie.
is all about global development and transformation of the financial system. These are the people who came handy to assist the African Union behind the scenes to be able to grapple with those kind of global challenges.
Sophie, thank you so much for your time. That's Sophie Mokoena, our international editor here at SABC News.